Welcome to RSP Film and Theory. Adam Harstad, Matt Waldman. Today, let's talk a little bit about the Atlanta Falcons and the Kirk Cousins-Michael Penix situation that in terms of Cousins getting benched and having the past 4 weeks, he threw 8 interceptions, no touchdowns. I think the last person to do that, according to ESPN, was Brett Favre. And as I joked, Brett Favre had a stronger arm and was able to move around, which was something that Cousins hasn't really been able to do coming off the Achilles tear. And I think we have a good bit to talk about with that. I know that Adam has some things that he wants to share with it. I certainly have. You'll be able to see some of the stuff that I'll be talking about in my gut check column that came out yesterday. And also, you can look back probably at my second column of the year where I talked about this, fresh off of the draft and the idea of what Atlanta did with their strategy to select Michael Penix. So, Adam, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say about this. So, why don't you start? Tell us, your thoughts about this situation.
Yeah, so I've kind of been getting into it on Twitter, and I always say, I write for the audience you want, you get the audience you write for. Like, I say a bunch of stuff and people don't bat an eye. Like, I say some wild stuff that is like way outside mainstream, people don't bat an eye. But the one thing that I say that consistently, without fail, gets people mad is my take on this Atlanta situation. And I've been saying it for years, and every single time my mentions just explode with people telling me I'm an idiot. But I'm 100% right on this, and they are 100% wrong. So I don't really have thoughts on Cousins or Penix as players. I don't scout players. I don't eval players. If I were running a team, I would hire a front office to do that, and then I would trust them to do their job well. And if that front office is coming to me and saying, after doing the job you gave me, we think Kirk Cousins is worth $50 million a year. Okay, great. I'm signing Kirk Cousins $50 million a year. If the eval is coming in and people say, hey, we think that Penix is worth the number 8 overall pick. Great. I'm taking Penix with the number 8 overall pick. I know a lot of people are criticizing the Falcons now because they didn't like the Cousins signing at the time, and that's fair. That signing has not worked out at all like they hoped, so that's a fair criticism. Or a lot of people are criticizing him because they felt Penix was overdrafted. I think by Arif Hassan's consensus big board, he was like the number 34 player on the board. And yeah, there's a quarterback premium, but people felt, he was taking over some other quarterbacks who maybe should have gone first. I don't really have thoughts on that. If my front office tells me they're worth it, then they're worth it. But most of what I see is this hindsight idea that, like, it was dumb. Like, even if it was okay to give Cousins the contract, even if your front office says that that's fine and fair value for him, and even if it was okay to draft Penix, your front office is saying that's fine and fair value for him, it was dumb to do both. Either pick individually was fine. It's the two of them together that shows you're an idiot who doesn't have any idea what you're doing. And this is just absolutely atrociously wrong, right? This is just mind-bogglingly wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, the criticisms, people are like, if you spend 2 rookie picks on a quarterback in the same year, that's usually the one that I'll say is like, hey, if a team's got 2 picks in the first and you're on the clock and there's 2 quarterbacks that you like at both of those picks, why not just take both quarterbacks, right? Like, quarterbacks have like a 50-50 hit rate. If you take one of them, there's a 50% chance you have a guy. If you take 2 of them, there's a 75% chance you have a guy. Quarterback's really important. It's better to have a 75% chance than a 50% chance. And there's even like a 25% chance that you have 2 guys and you can trade one of them and recoup the cost you paid to get him in the first place. Like, this is an obvious no-brainer. But people think you can only commit resources to one quarterback at a time, and it's dumb, it's stupid, it's wrong. And people believe this very wrong thing very, very passionately, and they yell at me every time I tell them it's a very wrong thing. But, like, teams commit 2 rookie draft picks to quarterbacks in the same offseason all the time. The Carolina Panthers drafted a quarterback with the 1.01 pick and the 1.09 pick in the same offseason. It's just the quarterback they drafted was Bryce Young. They spent the 2 picks on one quarterback. And somehow it's fine if you spend 2 picks on one quarterback, but it's idiotic if you spend 2 picks on 2 quarterbacks, Or the Denver Broncos paid top of the market free agent money to a quarterback and also spent multiple draft picks drafting quarterbacks. It's just all of that was spent on one guy. It was spent on Russell Wilson. The Bears sent 2 firsts and a big contract to get Jay Cutler. And these ideas were, I liked these moves at the time. These are teams that need a quarterback, and sometimes there are no good options to get a quarterback, so you have to pick the least bad one, and that was fine. But if it's fine to spend $50 million a year and 2 draft picks on Russell Wilson, it should also be fine to spend $50 million a year on a free agent and trade those 2 draft picks for a rookie, or to take multiple, because and the criticisms of this are that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you can't develop them, which is just patently false. I mean, we've seen, like, look at Jordan Love. Jordan Love did not get any starter reps for like 2 years. And then in his 3rd year, they committed to him. He went in, he hit the ground running. He was fine.
Aaron Rodgers before that.
Aaron Rodgers before that. They were not just fine. They were significantly better than they were coming into the league because they developed. Like, if you go back and watch Aaron Rodgers' first 2 preseasons, the dude looked horrible. He looked atrocious. He looked like he had no idea what he was doing. When Green Bay turned to him in 2008, a lot of people thought it was going to end very badly because he had been so bad to that point. He had given very little cause to believe that he was good. But it turns out that he was developing. He was improving as a player in that time behind the scenes. He didn't need the starter reps to do it. He didn't need whatever. And as you often say, how much development is the NFL really doing anyway? Most of this development is happening on a player basis. And so the idea that you need to give a guy starter reps to develop him, just wrong, just flat out wrong. Some quarterbacks might be developed better with more starter reps. Some quarterbacks might develop better with fewer starter reps. There's a right way and a wrong way, and not a right way or a wrong way, but there's a best way to develop. But you can have 2 quarterbacks and develop them both at the same time.
Can I interrupt real quick
Please
with
do.
that? Yeah. I think that's a great point, and I think that's why I'm a big believer in the whole idea of intermittent starting and benching, because you can have the control to look at your quarterback and go, what does he need right now? Is he lost? Do I think he's lost and this is going to do a little bit more damage to his development and he's going to overthink things if I don't take him out of this game? Or am I going to or do I need to let this guy play through it? It's kind of like, I don't remember, there's a movie with Adam Sandler called Hustle about the NBA scout, and then they have like the real NBA player and how like he knows his prospect has a temper problem and hasn't dealt with the level of trash talk that he's dealing with right now, and that this one top prospect's in his head. So you can see at one point he's like, I got to get this guy out of the game, and they won't get him out of the game, and you see that he blows up and loses it. And it nearly costs the kid his career. Well, those are the types of things, I mean, it's not the same type of reason, but those are the types of things when Sam Darnold says to his coach, I'm seeing ghosts, and Adam Gase is like just blindly staring ahead, coked out, thinking about where he's going to get his next bag, that's not a good example of, listening to what your quarterback needs. But there's some guys that like probably Bo Nix is a good example where the coach might say, you need to stop doing this, and Bo Nix disagrees and is like in his Sean Payton's face and yelling at him about something, and he's like believes what's gonna happen here, and is adamant about what he sees, then then Sean Payton's probably going to go, I'm going to let this guy play through it because he doesn't look confused. He's very decisive. He might be wrong, but we'll go back and look at this. But his confidence is still here, and he's still making good decisions on the whole. He just made, it's that kind of thing. You've got to understand, and I think you need coaches with a deft hand with that. So anyway, yeah, I think intermittent play is very important that way.
I mean, like, how's Bryce Young looked ever since his career was ended by his benching? Right?
Yeah.
Like, the dude needed a break, and it was good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him. I still don't know if he's going to be, the long-term thing, but that bet looks a lot more alive now than it did before they sat him down. I mean, it's just, like, it just flies in the face of everything we've seen. And it's not like this is ancient history. Like, we saw Jordan Love 2 years ago. This is Patrick Mahomes sat almost his entire rookie year, came in late in the year, got a couple games, was MVP his first full season as a starter. Aaron Rodgers, Phillip Rivers, we can name. That sort of development pattern is no longer the norm. Not because it doesn't work, but because of salary cap pressures and various changes. There's more development happening at the college level, so players are entering more pro-ready than they were once upon a time. And there's a lot of forces that are making it less common, but it's not making it less valid. You can develop players And then another one is that, like teams won't know what they have. Teams know what they have. The Cardinals knew what they had in Josh Rosen within a year of drafting him. Like teams know pretty quickly. The example I always go back to is the Dallas Cowboys in 1989. Jimmy Johnson gets there. They had the number 1 overall pick. They took Troy Aikman. And then Steve Walsh, who was Jimmy Johnson's college quarterback, was coming out in the supplemental draft. And the Cowboys spent a first-round pick on Walsh because Johnson wanted to get his guy. That first-round pick wound up being the number 1 pick in 1990. So this is the only time in history that a team has featured 2 rookie quarterbacks, both drafted first overall on the same team at the same time. And what the Cowboys did is they watched them both for 18 months. They decided who they liked. They committed to that guy. They traded the guy who lost the battle for a first, a second, and a third, largely recouping the costs they paid to get him, and won three Super Bowls in 4 years. And Johnson said at the time, like there's these stories about like the 90s Cowboys, and Johnson said he wanted his guy from college because he was comfortable with him and he thought like that was what was going to succeed for him. And then he later said that he didn't know what a pro quarterback looked like until he saw Troy Aikman in practice. And it was clear to him that Walsh is my guy. I'm going to stick by him. I had a lot of success with him. And he get in and he saw Aikman, and he's like, this Aikman guy's on a completely other level. And he supposedly said to everybody in the organization, like, don't you breathe one bad word about Steve Walsh because we're going to trade him the first opportunity we get. And I don't want anybody out there taking his value. Nobody say one negative thing about Walsh until after we trade him. But teams know you can get 2 quarterbacks in. And especially like a veteran quarterback and a rookie, that's a fine succession plan. You can get 2 rookies. You could bring in 2 veterans. Teams are largely overconfident in their evaluation. When the Bears traded for Jay Cutler, they thought, surely we have a franchise quarterback now. And they didn't. There's no contingency plan in case they're wrong, because they're not wrong. They absolutely have their guy. When the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins, a lot of people wanted that surety. They wanted them to say, we are 100% confident that Kirk Cousins is going to return to his pre-Achilles form, and that he's going to fit in our scheme as well as he did in Minnesota's. And he's not going to miss Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison in the friendly confines of Minnesota. And he's going to be exactly what we were hoping for him to be. And fans wanted to see that because that's what they're accustomed to seeing. They're accustomed to seeing teams give that level of certainty. And when the Falcons didn't, when they said, yeah, we think that we have a good roster and a bad division, and we really just need a quarterback to have a real shot at winning this thing. And signing Kirk Cousins gives us a real shot at having a quarterback, but also like maybe he's not at his pre-Achilles form. Maybe he doesn't transition to our scheme. So let's also take Michael Penix and let's double our chances of having a real quarterback. And I think that eval was largely right. Atlanta's 7-7, contending still for the NFC South because it's such a terrible division. They could still get a home playoff game, even though Cousins wasn't anywhere near what they wanted him to be. And people get mad at that. And then the other thing I get is that, like, if you're going to commit to Cousins, you basically have to operate as if he's going to be good, because if he's bad, you're screwed. It's the old Tom Moore, Peyton Manning quote that if 18 goes down, we're fucked and we don't practice fucked. And they're like, if you've committed to Kirk Cousins, you need to surround him with as much talent as you can. If you use that number 8 pick, like that can be the thing that pushes you over the top. And the idea that any rookie pick is going to be the difference between a team contending and not contending, any non-quarterback rookie pick, it's just laughable. Like if you look at the Atlanta Falcons and you say, okay, let's add, what's the best case scenario? Brock Bowers. Let's add Brock Bowers to this team. Is that team, are you like, oh man, without Brock Bowers, they've got no shot at a Super Bowl. But you give them Brock Bowers and man, they're real contenders now.
You give them Kyle Pitts with Desmond Ridder, and they're real contenders now.
Right. Rome Odunze. How much is Rome Odunze? Realistically, Odunze might go on to be a great pro. He very well might. But how much is he realistically improving Atlanta's chances of winning a Super Bowl in the next year or two?
Malik
Look
Neighbors.
At Vegas lines. Right. Neighbors was gone by the time they picked, but imagine some world where they got Neighbors instead, or heaven forbid even traded up for Neighbors. But even a superstar receiver, like even peak Devontae Adams, if he misses a game, Vegas moves the line by like half a point. That's how much a all-pro receiver is realistically impacting your team. It's probably like a half point in expectation. And newsflash, most rookies are not all-pro peak Devontae Adams within their first 3 years. Devontae Adams was not all-pro peak Devontae Adams within their first 3 years. So the idea that like, oh, by not taking a skill player there or a position player there, you're wasting Kirk Cousins' window. I don't think his skill position would have materially impacted Kirk Cousins' window. If you like two quarterbacks, the position's important. Getting multiple bites at that apple is going to greatly increase your chances of having the guy because people think they have the guy all the time and they're wrong all the time. I'm not going to comment on the eval of Cousins or Penix, and I know you have a lot to say about those specific evals, but if Atlanta had the evals that they had, getting both quarterbacks was perfectly fine and unobjectionable. In fact, it was even the right move. It was the smart move. More teams should devote more resources to quarterbacks, and not more resources because they're already devoting this level of resources. They're just spending all of this on a single quarterback when a lot of times your odds are much higher if you split your bet and spend it on two different quarterbacks.
No, I think that's perfectly acceptable, and I think it's a great way of looking at this. Another example I think about wide receivers is it wasn't that long ago, at least to me, that Randy Moss went from the Vikings to Kerry Collins and the Raiders, and then they said he was done, and then he went with Tom Brady, and look what happened. I mean, and Bill Belichick still says the smartest receiver I've ever played with was Randy Moss, one of the smartest football players he ever worked with.
And there's this idea too that like if you're getting multiple quarterbacks, you're going to damage their psyche. Like they can't compete. And like how incredibly infantilizing.
Yeah.
Right? Like
yeah.
You look at somebody, you look at a quarterback coming from a top BCS program. That program brought in 4- and 5-star recruits every damn year of that guy's time there. He had to fend off challenges every damn year. There was no incumbent. Every year you had to fight and win that job in college at a top program.
Was it easy for Jalen Hurts after Tua took over in the national championship game?
No.
I never gave the job back? No. But did Jalen Hurts go to Oklahoma and light it up and eventually become the better of the two players in the NFL? I mean, that's... Yeah. Did Steve Young have to sit behind Jim McMahon, in at BYU and learn from him? I mean, absolutely. There's cases like this all the time, and I think that I think it's a terrific point. And I think one of the problems is the optics seem to be it's smart when you pick up all these free agent quarterbacks and late round quarterbacks. If you draft the quarterback from the 4th round on, and then you have the 1st round quarterback, that's smart.
Right.
Because, now you're getting a good deal, and you're still getting these other players at a higher expense. It was
fine to take Cousins because he was a 4th round pick, but had he been a 3rd round pick, I really would have regretted taking that second quarterback behind RG3. Yeah.
Now, was it fine to take Cousins because I think it was fine to take Cousins for exact that. On that surface, yes. But was it fine for Mike Shanahan, who listen, great coach on the field, a manipulative motherfucker, outside of that. Was it fine for him to go, okay, Daniel Snyder, I know you want Robert Griffin, but I don't want Robert Griffin. I don't want to deal with Robert Griffin at all. So let's make a deal. I'm going to take Kirk Cousins, and then I'm going to do everything I can to sabotage Robert Griffin. Fortunately for him, injuries helped that out and greased the skids significantly, so that then when the second year came along and his knee was bulky, let's play max protect and have 3 wide receivers go out on every route, maybe 2, mostly 2, and see if our poor offensive line can hold up while they beat the shit out of Robert Griffin every week, But, I took out the sprint packages from Jake Plummer after his All-Pro year when he threw interceptions against the Patriots, and the locker room still loved him, and I hated him at this point and didn't want him to play anymore, and I forced him to retire when I got Cutler. I mean, you have that kind of gamesmanship. So that's a different story. But I would say you're right in terms of it. Quarterbacks should be able to compete just like everybody else.
Every other position on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Ravens took Hayden Hurst and Mark Andrews in the same draft.
Yeah.
The Packers took Aaron Jones and
Jamal Williams.
Jamal Williams. And nobody's like, oh, how could you do that to Jamal Williams? How dare you make him compete for his job? How dare you make Hayden Hurst? You're bringing in his competition in the same draft. And I get that you can have multiple tight ends on the field at the same time, but do you think that like a team adding a tight end isn't a warning to every other tight end already on the roster? Of course it is.
Yeah.
And every other position has to deal with it. And you're saying these quarterbacks should be leaders of men. They should have this mental toughness. They need to be able to throw an interception and shake it off. And also they're teeny tiny little babies who can't handle somebody else wanting their job. Like, if a quarterback can't handle that, Stephen Fatsis, a journalist, embedded himself with the 2006 Denver Broncos as a kicker. And he wrote about what it was like in training camp with the Denver Broncos. And the Broncos had a quarterback named Bradley Van Pelt, who was kind of a local hero. He had kind of been a legend at University of Colorado, or Colorado State, which one of the Colorado universities. But he was beloved, and the franchise liked him, and they were kind of developing and grooming him. And he was a 7th-round pick. He probably wasn't going to amount to anything. But the franchise was kind of setting him up. And then they picked, and he thought, like, I'm going to be the next guy. Like, Plummer's the guy, I'm the next guy. And then the Broncos spent a pick on Jay Cutler. And according to Fatsis in the book, like that entire training camp, Van Pelt was just checked out. Like, he just wasn't competing. He's like, oh, I thought I was the next guy, and now they brought in someone else, and now I'm just done. That's fine. I'm not even going to try. But if a quarterback's like that, wouldn't you rather know? Like, if a quarterback can't handle adversity, better to find out.
I mean, that's Brian Hoyer. He's like, whenever they kept drafting other quarterbacks to replace him as the number 2 behind Tom Brady, he was like, that's fine. You're going to do it every year. Let's see what we got,
Yeah.
And
somebody might beat me, but they're going to earn it.
Yeah, and he wasn't physically talented, but he had some starts and had some good games when he was used as a journeyman starter. Speaking of infantilized type of responses, I'm going to rant a little bit about Kirk Cousins a bit because, again, and I'm going to say this, we all make mistakes. He's only 35 years old. He may be a leader of men on the field, but his job description isn't GM, scouting director, president of an organization.
Football does not select for well-adjusted individuals too. Like, we have to add that layer in too.
That's right. Yeah. And quarterback is the ego position. It's the fighter pilot position type of thing. Maybe so much so that the NFL thought, let's test them with fighter pilot tests, which was probably kind of silly. But but there is a little bit of that in there. So yes, is it? This is both. When you look at Kirk Cousins' response in the draft, when he was asked by the media, "What do you think of the pick?" and he said, "I'm stunned," and that they probably should have used that draft capital elsewhere. You've got me. We need to shore up this team. And then in the same sentence, or in the same interview, like not seconds later, say, "Well, how's your leg?" And he's like, "Well, I can only run in a straight line right now at speed." And it's effectively May. And you've got 3 months to be able to do the things you're supposed to be able to do. And part of it's not running, because we know Kirk Cousins and running weren't really synonymous. But being able to, rotate on that left foot so that you can actually throw with velocity and accuracy and do it with a level of violence, that's more difficult than it seems with an Achilles tear to be able to do. And, Brandon Angelo documented that well on our podcasts on Wednesdays, before the season, and saying, that's the thing to watch for, because if he can't generate velocity, this is going to be a shit show. And sure enough, after the first 4 weeks, it was pretty clear he couldn't generate velocity on a consistent basis. And when he started to try and push that, it doesn't look like he was recovering very well. And the defenses were seeing where the limitations were and started to make adjustments to that. And next thing you know, you have Kirk Cousins with 8 interceptions and 0 touchdowns over the past 4 weeks, and that's and taking multiple sacks and things like that. But for you, as a there's two things here. Was Kirk Cousins wrong to look at it and a little bit entitled to say, I've earned the ability to talk about what I think an organization should and should not do as a franchise quarterback in the past who's delivered strong production? A lot of fans look at that and say, yes, he's earned the ability to say that. But I would argue, and I had a scout actually email me yesterday about this too, who was like, it's fascinating to me that people don't realize that the NFL, as well as other professions, should be this way, but the NFL especially, that people can always have to earn their keep every year. And that means that, maybe you're not entitled to say certain things. And when you're Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles tear and telling people in the same breath that you're saying this Michael Penix pick was bad, that you can't run in a straight line, maybe you don't realize that you don't have the equity anymore to say, this is what I think should be doing. Maybe you should be saying, I'm glad I got paid this amount of money. Let me prove that I'm still worth that amount of money and that I'm healthy enough to do it. Now, honest mistake, you're not the figurehead of an organization off the field. The bigger mistake is Atlanta. Atlanta probably should have said, Arthur Blank should probably call a meeting, had the players there, and said, look, the draft is coming, and the media is going to come and ask you what they think of the picks. If you have anything to say other than positive things, or I'm looking forward to competing with him, then the only response you should have is to keep your mouth shut, because unless your title is GM, president of operations, or director of scouting, do your job, and that's not your job, because you're creating a shitstorm in the media, you're undermining your leadership, who just paid a shit ton of money for you, and that does not show lockstep leadership on that level. And on top of it, I know they got Uche. Who'd they get? Not Uche. Judon. They got Judon, and then they added the safety from Denver, and that was the big criticism about adding Penix, is they could have gotten another safety, they could have gotten another pass rusher. They needed that, and they added those two guys. Were those two guys especially effective? Probably not, looking at this defense. It didn't change how the defense has actually played overall. But I would also argue that they were a playoff contending team last year on pay. If you looked at them on film, they had a lot of that there. If they had a quarterback who knew the difference between when and when not to throw the ball and where and when not to throw the ball. So they needed a quarterback, and if, like Adam said, you can criticize the gamble that they took, and some people might in hindsight say, well, they should have taken Sam Darnold then, but we're not sure Sam Darnold might have.
I'd like to show me you saying that before.
Yeah. Yes.
Before Darnold had this hot start to the season.
Exactly.
And I'll buy that. That's just pure hindsight. There was nothing in Darnold to suggest that.
And I'll buy it even more if somehow Darnold winds up in New Orleans, replaces Derek Carr, and outplays Derek Carr in New Orleans or somewhere else when he leaves. Because he's got it good in Minnesota. And I would say I hope he stays there. But he gets a chance to stay there. But that's another point. But the thing is that, when you look at that, you look at this, Atlanta took a gamble. That's fine. It's okay. It's also fine that they hedged on it, and they also planned ahead for it, because he's 36 heading into the season with an Achilles tear, and he's not a mobile dude in the first place. And we think we can win now if we get him. If we're wrong, we front-loaded the contract anyway in the first 2 years. So we're expecting a couple years we'll have Penix ready. And oh, Lord, Michael Penix is a year older than the average quarterback if he comes in. I mean that's another thing. That's a point of stupidity.
I saw a take recently that on Twitter that maybe we just need to cancel breakout age as a factor until after this COVID stuff works its way through.
Yeah.
And well, maybe the whole breakout age thing was already pretty well accounted for, and there was just a cluster of hits, and that made it look like a thing.
Yeah. I mean, I can see the argument that at wide receiver, it might have some value because, especially at top schools, where if you start at 19 at Alabama and you have a rich wide receiver program, that's impressive. If that's, or at LSU or something like that. Now, if you're starting at 19 at, the Georgia School for the Ruby Mines at Ruby Falls, that's probably not nearly as impressive, and that needs to be taken into account. But when you look at all this, so Cousins to me, the Falcons need to learn. Like Art Blank needs to say, all right, we need to have this meeting before the draft so any of our players don't open their mouth on an optic standpoint that they shouldn't. And Cousins probably, again, that's that confidence bordering on arrogance you want a quarterback to have. But at the same time, he probably shouldn't have said that this was a bad pick when we don't know if we have a quarterback, or I need to prove that they actually got one at this level to sign from this standpoint. But the whole decision and the whole decision to do this, I think, is perfectly fine, and we need to change the optics of, yes, you can draft multiple early round players or have multiple early round talents on your team at the same time, at the same position, at the position in football, because again, the development is not the NFL, like you said, reference what I often talk about. Development happens, off the field, away from, away from the facility. The things that these guys really need to work on happen away from that. The schematic stuff. I mean, I'm just watching Aaron Rodgers' Enigma last night. I watched the first episode of it, talking about Brett Favre, and he said, Favre was icy to me, as we've always heard that story. But he said, I just watched Brett. That's what I did, and I had a good coach who schematically showed me what we needed to do. But when you think about why Aaron Rodgers was special, it was the stuff that I didn't know, and it was the stuff that most of us don't know. It was the fact that when he was a kid, he figured out that football, and especially quarterbacking, was statistical probabilities. And he would play stratomatic baseball and figure out all the and he was very mathematically inclined, and so he started figuring out things like these routes have a 50% probability, these routes have an 80% probability, these routes have a 20% probability. When I have a player who can do these things, you can bump that up somewhat. When I would play stratomatic as a kid all afternoon long, it was learning odds and looking at the rolls and learning these different things. And then that progressed to being in college and being at Butte College, before, because he was 5'9", 170 pounds, or 5'10", 170 pounds when he first became a freshman. And the coach was like, this kid's pretty smart. He's like, he knows the game. He can make audibles. He can do hot reads. He can do check with me's. He can do all the things that pros do from a mental, conceptual perspective that we don't usually let these guys do in college. But I'm going to let him do it because that's what he does well, and he can throw the ball really well for his size. So go ahead. And so then Ted Tedford sees him at Cal and sees the same things. And, he's talking about it. He's like, I was scouting a tight end. And then I kept seeing Aaron Rodgers playing and making these throws. He's like, I'm going to take a look at him too when I get up there. And he takes a look at Aaron, and Aaron's like, I had the best throwing day of my life probably that day, which was great. He said, but, I heard from him, and then when I started working with Tedford would have this game of checkers where it was literally, black checkers and red checkers, and he labeled them all with positions. instead of them playing checkers, they would spend like an hour every day lining up, like Aaron would line up a formation, and then he would line up a defense against it, and then Aaron's job was to use motion and shifts and certain calls and explain where the blocking was and all the things that a lot of quarterbacks don't do at that level. So this isn't stuff that you see in the pro game. The pro quarterback coaches haven't created some modified game of checkers to help him learn everything that's happening out on the field. They didn't teach him they expected him to perform reads and hots and things like that, but a lot of quarterbacks don't do that. And these days, they come in more ready because coaches have dumbed down the offenses. Kurt Warner, if you're on X, Kurt Warner pretty much every day or every week this year was like, pure progression reads are ruining the development of quarterbacks. These quarterbacks are being brought in and they're simplifying all these offenses. Why not let these guys develop and become the guys that they could potentially be? They're all smart enough to do it. They just haven't had the experience to do it, and it's slowing down their development, but it's speeding up their ability to get onto the field and optically look good. And I'm putting words in Kurt's mouth, but it's basically what he's saying here, is to optically look good. And guess whose jobs it keeps longer? The head coach and the assistant coach's jobs longer. Doesn't help the quarterback all that much. They still learn sink or swim mode. So there's some, even the old school quarterbacks from the previous generation are kind of going, the position's getting dumbed down a bit, and it's not helping the position because eventually defenses get wise enough to go, we're not going to let you play this dumb shit all the time. We're going to make you wise up and get your game better. And then you have that dip that I talk about all the time. And they're not able to handle it. Some eventually do, some don't. All we're doing is delaying it. It's kind of like delaying, where like the previous generations, maybe you had to do adult things between, 12 and 18. And maybe some of those things weren't very good for young kids to be doing at that age that were making them do more adult responsibilities. Some of those things were probably good to have them do. Whereas now, later generations, some parents don't do that anymore. And now adolescence seems to be 22 through 26 as opposed to like 12 through 18. And you see some of those things happening in the way that people talk about it. And I think that the same thing's happening with quarterbacks. Is like their adolescence is now coming, 12 to 16 to 18 games in, to 20 games in, as opposed to the first, 12 to 14 games in.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think to some extent, I look at Kurt Warner and I feel like there's very much an old man yells at clouds. That,
yes, sure.
Quarterbacks these days should do the things that quarterbacks in my day did. Like Tom Brady does this all the time.
Yes, he does.
He's talking about like, all these receiver protections are bad because it used to be the quarterback's job to protect the receivers. And now these quarterbacks aren't having to learn the skill of protecting their receivers. And yeah, sure, quarterbacks should learn how to protect their receivers. But like, if the receivers are more protected, that's good, Tom. Like, it doesn't matter if the quarterback's job is easier. It matters if the receiver is safer. So I do think there is an old man yells at clouds dimension. And the game's always changing and the game's always evolving. But, I completely agree that there's this principal agent problem where the head coach and the offensive coordinator, their job is not to do what's best for this quarterback in the long term. It's to do what's best for them keeping their job in the short term. It takes kind of like a very unique situation to overcome that misalignment. I don't know. Some of this, I think, too, is that I don't think people understand the financial realities of the quarterback situation in the NFL these days. And just how, I mean, like, people complain about someone like Kirk Cousins making $50 million a year. Fine. Derek Carr's making $37.5 million a year. Baker Mayfield's making $33.3 million a year. That's the reality of the situation. I think Kirk Cousins, based on what he showed in Minnesota, was a better bet than Derek Carr or Baker Mayfield. He deserves to be paid more. If that's the market, he deserves to be paid more. And then on the other end, Kirk Cousins is a 36-year-old quarterback coming off of an Achilles tear. I know that he's been an Iron Man prior to this one injury, but Statistical fact. Players miss more time as they get older. It's just fact. At 36, 37, 38, we should expect him to miss more and more games going forward. Atlanta, if they really believe all they need is competent quarterback play, they need a backup quarterback. And backup quarterbacks are way more expensive than people think. Gardner Minshew is making $12 million a year for Gardner Minshew. Michael Penix is making $5 million a year. Right now, it's you could pay $7 million more and get Gardner Minshew, which I'm not saying Gardner Minshew is like this phenomenal backup quarterback. Like Gardner Minshew should be like the bare minimum standard for backup quarterback for a team that considers itself a title contender and has a quarterback with injury questions. You need at least at a minimum, you need Gardner Minshew level play. It'd be better to have more. But the reality is that, Michael Penix is saving you $7 million this year. By year 4, he'll probably be about $10 to $12 million cheaper than a Gardner Minshew level backup quarterback. And so you need that quarterback anyway. And I don't know. People love a story, and I get it because I love a story. And they want the story is we're getting Kirk Cousins, and Kirk Cousins is going to be good, and that's the path. And all of this stuff complicates the story, but the real story is complicated.
Yeah, and I think we have to understand. I mean, take a look at teams. People always go, well, quarterbacks take time to develop, and by the time you figure out what you have, and if you wait 2 years for them on the bench, you don't really know what you have yet, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Okay, so the New York Giants thought, should have known what they had before they drafted Daniel Jones, but that's a different story. It took, 6 years? 5-6 years for them to finally say, oh, we're done with that? That's basically two player career windows for most players. So basically you've gone through 2 windows of contention for an average football team. The Las Vegas Raiders, Derek Carr, we could pretty much say, could he possibly have been a franchise caliber quarterback, or Derek Carr? Yeah, possibly. Could we argue, nah, he's not really a franchise caliber quarterback, hasn't really proven it. He hasn't really been able to lead this team to playoff victories and be a team that puts them in contention, a player that's really putting them in contention. You could make that argument too. When's the last time the Las Vegas Raiders have had a quarterback who could do that? Rich Gannon, who's not even doesn't even have a career doing commentary anymore. He's 2 careers gone at this point.
I would caveat that. When was the last time the Raiders had a quarterback capable of doing that, or when was the last time the Raiders had a quarterback capable of doing it for the Raiders? Because Carson Palmer was capable of doing that. He was good enough to be that guy.
Yes.
He was not good enough to be that guy.
True.
On a team like the Raiders.
True.
The Raiders, you need a hire.
Yeah.
And that's part of it too, is people are like, well, you want to maximize the outcome for the quarterback. For a team, you're not trying to maximize the outcome for the quarterback. You're trying to maximize the outcome for the team. Like if you have the worst team in the league and every quarterback who goes there is going to suck.
Yep.
You still want the best quarterback you can get. Like it doesn't matter if you're in an unhealthy environment. You still need the best quarterback you can get.
A good example would be the Titans then. Since Steve McNair, they've gone through Vince Young, they've gone through Kerry Collins, they've gone through Ryan Tannehill, Malik Neighbors, and Will Levis, and Mike Vrabel is a top candidate for a coaching job. And Mike Vrabel fielded some tough teams that kept them in the thick of it pretty much every year, with or without Marcus Mariota. Forgot to add Marcus Mariota into that mix too. And they did get into the playoffs a little bit, but did they really find their franchise quarterback? Because for the length of time those guys played, I think Steve McNair played at least, he started at least probably for the equivalent of 3 or 4 of those players, their tenures in Tennessee as starting quarterbacks. So,
by the way, McNair, famously long development curve.
Yep.
Famously long development curve.
He got intermittent playing with Chris Chandler, And he got like first he got a series, first got like a player or two, then he'd maybe get like part of a series, then he'd start getting a couple of series, then he'd get a quarter, then he'd get a half, and then he'd complain to Jeff Fisher, "When are you going to just let me play?" You know. But I mean, those types of that type of thing happen, and I think that it's important that we understand when you don't find the right quarterback, your organizations languish for years. So why wouldn't you? And if you get the right quarterback, who wants to come to your team? Good free agents, quality free agents. If you're going to add one or two guys to your team to make a difference, it's going to be a quality free agent who's at the end of his career who can give you that year to get over the hump, a Reggie White type of situation. I know that that's probably maybe too big of a scenario, but still, like, you see that kind of thing happening where the ringers come in and get their chance to play because there's a good quarterback there that gives them a chance to win. And I think that's why if you bring in two good quarterbacks or three, and you're like, well, yeah, I know we didn't get the defensive player that we wanted to get this year, but you know what? The reality is, if we draft 7 players this year, 2 of them are probably going to get hurt, maybe 3 and not be the same player. One of them might get suspended or act up or not play well and do something to get himself cut because he's just not mature or professional enough for the game. So we're already 3 players out of 7 in. One's probably going to underwhelm but be a decent depth player. One might be a decent starter, but by the time he's not going to be worth his contract, by the next contract negotiation, he's not going to be worth paying a veteran second contract to. So we've got maybe 1 player out of 7 that we actually go, all right, let's pay him an extra deal. That's probably the reality of the NFL. If we see it that way, then you go, let me get 2 or 3 quarterbacks, because if I hit on one and he turns into a fucking stud, then I'm going to be able to draw more players from there, and then I don't have to worry about quarterback as an early round guy for the next couple of years. If I want to draft one because he's the most valuable talent there, I can do that too, because then, I could trade that player if everything's going well elsewhere. And they go, well, he hit on him. They traded. Why did they add him? Well, because they like to farm quarterbacks. We've already shown that. And you know what? They've gotten good quarterbacks out of that. Maybe we should do business with them.
Like the Packers under Favre when they were just churning out everybody, the entire league's starters.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's limits. There's a limited number of roster spots. Like if you have 50 quarterbacks, don't draft a 51st, obviously. But every team needs 2 quarterbacks. There's not a team in the league that's running with 1 quarterback, nor should there be.
Every scout says if you don't have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks.
Right. Yeah, you need it unless you're trying to lose, in which case, oh great, it doesn't matter if we don't have a quarterback. But any team that considers itself a contender, you need 2 quarterbacks. And if you're devoting the 2 roster spots and you're devoting all that money, you might as well spend it on a guy with a shot like Penix rather than somebody who's keeping the seat warm and who hopefully won't tank your chances when he comes in, like Gardner Minshew.
Yeah. Now I'll end this by just kind of giving a little bit of a scouting report on Michael Penix for those of you who aren't familiar, so that we can just talk about what to expect. And I break it down by position, who I think is going to be good, worth starting, maybe worth monitoring, worth using in a flex situation, things like that, based on the next 3 games, which are the Giants, the Commanders, and the Panthers. Pretty easy schedule. Now, the Washington Commanders, as a passing defense, look a lot better than on paper than what they really are. If you take a look at the quarterbacks that they faced, some of the quarterbacks that they faced are guys that I would just say not very good starters. I mean, I think there's 9 quarterbacks that they face that I would characterize as not very strong. And, Daniel Jones twice, Kyler Murray, I would add to that list. Will Levis. I'm trying to remember the rest, but there's, guys in that ilk. When you look at Penix, the thing that's going to stand out the most for you is that he has excellent arm talent, probably rivals Caleb Williams' arm talent, and is probably better than Caleb Williams' arm talent on specific throws. And those specific throws are the fades, the sideline timing routes, any boundary route that a receiver can go up and get or win with timing. He's got that kind of velocity, and he can deliver the ball with velocity and placement both from the pocket and on the move. So that's really good. He runs a 4.45 40. He is fast. Now he tries to win from the pocket more than he does anything else, and he's been he's been banged up throughout his career, so people are worried a little bit about that. But and when he breaks the pocket, he can gain yardage. So you've got two things right here that Kirk Cousins didn't show this year. And this offense was contracted as a result. The playbook had to be very much more limited because he couldn't throw the timing routes at the boundary that expanded the width and the depth of how you attack the field. So Michael Penix is going to do that right out of the gate. And that means he can leverage players like Kyle Pitts and Drake London to an easier degree than Kirk Cousins because of the fact that he can throw it further and throw it up and with placement at a level where the guys can go up and use their length and size to win it. Where I would say it's going to be a little more difficult is timing right away. His timing in the timing passing game, deep comebacks, deep outs, that's where Darnell Mooney is good. You're probably going to see Darnell Mooney and him struggle a little bit in the early games because they probably haven't practiced a lot together. And that kind of timing and placement takes a little bit more work and experience together. So I would say that Mooney, even with it, also he has a foot and Achilles issues that he's been kind of playing through right now too. And even though he got cleared last week, he was limited this week. It's bothering him. You know that he's got an issue with, and he's playing through something. I would say that Mooney's a boom-bust type of player. London's probably going to do very well because he'll be both the big slot substitute tight end, and you've got Kyle Pitts getting a chance to be that guy too. And where Penix really threw well at Washington was a lot of these routes that start inside and break outside. The sail routes, deep overs, the fades from the slot where they get lined up against nickel backs or safeties, or the corner gets put in there but there's a two-way go, and now it's a little bit easier to be able to get that ball where it needs to be. And Kyle Pitts is going to get those opportunities, and so is Drake London. So I would say those two guys are probably going to be your top plays on those types of big play throws. And then you're going to see a lot of scheme plays probably to Bijan and Ray McLeod, RPOs, screens, things like throwouts, stuff like that. But Penix is tough from the pocket. He's always been very good at being able to get the ball out and do it at a level where only the receiver can get the target. Now, does that mean it's going to translate to the NFL at a higher level of complexity and all that going on? Probably not. You're probably going to see more completions from Penix. You're going to see more interceptions, not more than what Kurt has had, but just a continuation that they're going to turn the ball over. You're probably going to see more fumbles because he's going to have to get used to acclimating to being in the pocket and what his pocket clock should and shouldn't be. You're going to see more big plays. You're going to see more touchdowns, easy bar, low bar, with what Cousins was doing the past 4 weeks. And you're going to see fewer looks to Darnell Mooney probably, and more looks to the big receivers in this mix. And if they don't beat the first two teams and they're out of contention, then you're probably going to see more Kadarrell Hodge and Casey Washington if they're healthy enough to play, because he's worked with them on the second team and probably a little bit more familiar with some of those guys. But you're going to see big plays from Penix, more ability to break the pocket, and he can be a boom-bust QB2 for you in flex leagues, and maybe even due to the defenses that he's facing, a boom-bust starter if you're really desperate because you've lost some guys that you leaned on as late-round quarterbacks. You're going to, I would say overall, I was impressed with the few plays I saw in Denver. number of weeks ago. Again, it was only a handful. But one of the things I was impressed with is I watched him change a play at the line of scrimmage, late in the game and make a big play out of it. So if we're seeing a guy who comes in and it looks like he's making adjustments that Bryce Young was making after his benching and outwitting Steve Spagnuolo's defense at Kansas City, and we're seeing signs that Michael Penix can do some of that, plus deliver with his physical skills, you might see a player who's going to get a lot of people excited. But if he looks like, crap warmed over on stale toast, like Aaron Rodgers probably did, early on as you described, then it's no big deal at this stage. He's going to get another full off season and a chance to do what he, acclimate and get better. But I think more likely you're going to see good signs, and you're going to see these defenses. They generally play vanilla. They generally, they're gonna do predictable things. They're gonna play their base scheme. It's going to be a lot of cover 3, cover 1 with some cover 2 mixed in and some quarters mixed in. You're going to see some pre-snap disguising, but it's going to be more about how do we make him think we're blitzing the house, and then we're going to drop and cover. And then we're going to see some where we're going to actually blitz the house on him and see what he can do with that. And if he can't handle the blitz early, we're going to keep blitzing him. But and if he can, then we're going to do more of the fake blitz, drop and cover stuff. So, at the end of the day, because Atlanta can still run the football, you're not going to see as much of that. You're going to see more cover 3, cover 1. Do I have a cover 1 or a cover 2 situation? Do I have zone or man? If I have man, I'm thrown to the boundary and I'm going deep, and I can do that, or I can do the timing route here and give that a shot in the way that Cousins couldn't do it this year. And that alone opposing defenses may be expecting that, but they don't know how it actually manifests with this young quarterback, and they haven't watched him enough yet. So he's going to get the benefit of, more plainer looks that aren't game plan to stop him because they haven't gone through their process yet.
Well, and even forcing a defense to respect something that wasn't previously an element of the offense is just going to open up other stuff elsewhere.
Exactly. So that's to me the early book on Michael Penix, what you can expect from a fantasy perspective, in terms of ranges of things, and we'll see. It'll be a fun and interesting look to see where he's at right now and where he needs to go.
And I know a lot of people didn't like the pick. They didn't think he was worth a pick as high as he. Not present company excluded. I know you've always been a fan of Penix, but I know the general consensus was that it was a reach. He was overdrafted. Fine. I would remind people not to be overconfident in their takes and to look at the last 4 or 5 highly drafted quarterbacks who were considered reaches. Justin Herbert was considered a reach. Josh Allen was considered a reach. Bo Nix was considered a reach, and he's been looking pretty good this year. Obviously hot and cold, he's had his flashes. Some people considered CJ Stroud a reach. We just don't know, and we can't know until we see, and I'm excited to see. But I would just remind everybody again, the range of outcomes is always far bigger than you think.
For sure, and that's what's fun about being able to talk about this sport. And of course, you can find Adam talking about, fantasy football and football in general at Adam Harstad on X. Also, of course, at Football Guys. We haven't talked about the past couple of Dynasty and Theory articles that he's written, but you can learn. He's got an interesting one about rules. And why we use them for what we do, and why you should cut your defense at the end of the year, and go through that. Of course, the rookie scouting portfolio is available for pre-sale discount or pre-order discount at $19.95 at mattwaldman.com through Saturday. So you've got three more days. That basically Saturday at 11:59 is when I'm cutting it off. And then everyone who wants to pay full price is at $21.95. It'll be available April 1st. You can also subscribe to the 2025 version of the Dynasty Rankings and Projections service, where I provide a spreadsheet of all my projections updated once a month for certain for certain prescribed point times a year. I always forget what months I do at this time of of the year, but I believe I have one more to do at the end of this month, and then I'll have one in June, and then also the 2025 period starts in June too. I give a little bit of an overlap to say, hey, it's time to, I do this for you. You want to renew? You'll get one in, basically in July, twice in August, I think once in September, October, November, and December. I think that's how that works, if I remember now. So that's for $24.95. You can order that now too. And of course, the RSP has been donating a percentage of its sales to Darkness to Light, d2l.org. You can learn more about them there. We've donated approximately probably over $65,000, closer to $70,000 since 2012. So we're really proud of that, and learn about what they do in the community. And I hope you guys who are still in the thick of it in your playoffs, perform well. And we will see you probably in a couple weeks. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. We'll see how it goes from there. All right. Thanks. Bye.